People will want to see Josh.
Yeah. We got many competing
Both Joshes.
meetings tonight, though.
Yeah, it's a big night.
Yeah, huge night. It's, you know, from the Red Sox, Celtics, and Bruins, we go to Parks Rec, Master Plan, and Select Board. So
Plus, there's
trifecta.
All the county candidates are talking at the Democratic Town Committee meeting, which Josh and I are missing.
Oh.
True.
Is anyone attending that?
Oh yeah, they'll be.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, big county government.
Got to pay attention. Turns out this shit matters. Excuse me.
Well, we're broadcasting live on Facebook, Jess. I don't know if you heard the previous conversation.
All right.
My
We're on a time
goodness.
delay.
Uh-oh.
Michelle, hit the
Now.
beep.
We're almost
Right.
there. Not broadcasted just yet.
Oh, thank goodness. You saved me, Michelle.
Hi, everyone.
How you doing?
Hi, Carolina.
Hey.
See everyone.
Josh, before we go live, obviously, you can do the controls for the presentation, right?
Yeah, do you want me to start that?
Yeah, why don't you just put up the intro slide?
Okay.
And we can, if you want to broadcast, Michelle, for us.
Mhm.
See if there's any folks that are hanging out there.
Can you all see that?
Looks good.
Good evening, everyone. This is Jeremy Rosenberger, Planning Director for the Planning and Zoning Department at Town of Dedham. We're just getting underway here. Everyone's joining. Let's see how many members we have tonight so far. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We got 6 members, Jess, thus far. So we'll give people a couple minutes here.
I'll share the Facebook Live in case that reminds people.
We'll give another minute if you don't mind. Jess, we got 8 members. You mind if we get started or do you want to wait?
let's go ahead. We'll see, because we do have, I mean, it's good. 8 is not bad, right? And I want to respect the time of the people who've come, both of the committee members and the attendees.
All right. So Josh, if you don't mind going to the next slide.
Sure.
So if you don't mind, I'm just going to do a quick little protocol. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us, both members of the Master Plan Committee, MAPC members, and members of the public. Thank you for joining us tonight. Beautiful evening. I'm happy you spend some time with us. We have a great meeting ahead. Just some quick protocols. The Master Plan Committee, this is our 8th meeting, if you can't believe it. We're almost at double digits. And thank you for everyone's commitment. Just a couple, we're doing a Zoom webinar. So this format allows committee members to be visible and members of the community. You won't be visible, but you're more than happy to participate. And so for members of the community that might have questions or comments, please utilize either the questions and answers if you have questions, or when it becomes time for public comment, please raise your hand and we'll work to get we'll work to get you heard and seen as possible when the time is ready. For folks, members, I think it's best, and we used last time, we have questions. I think this presentation has a number of natural pauses, so I'm going to encourage folks to not ask questions unless necessary until then, but feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. We won't be able to answer those real time, but we'll definitely take them for the record, and when time is available, we'll all be able to take a look and answer accordingly. And of course, the raise the hand function is down below at the bottom of your screen. And this is actually being broadcast on Facebook Live. This is on the Planning and Zoning Department's page. You can find it on Facebook. Just search for Dedham Planning and Zoning, and hopefully you'll see that pop right up. And we'll also be recording it and providing meeting minutes and notes on our website. That's designingdedham2030.org. And that's the great resource for all that is this master plan. We have a wealth of stuff going on that we've discussed and continual as we're getting into the topic areas. So please, anyone that has any interest in what's going on, please check out that website. Josh, if you can go to the next page. And so just quickly before, Josh, why don't you take it from here, if I don't mind. So I'm going to introduce Josh Fiala, our consultant from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And you can also introduce your colleagues that are with us. And thank you for joining us for 8 of these, Josh, and many more to go.
Sure, happy to be here. Thank you, Jeremy. Good evening, everyone. Good to see you all again. Josh Fiala from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. I'm a principal planner there, as you all know. I'm joined this evening by quite a bit of our team. So as you all have seen frequently, Carolina Prieto, our community engagement specialist, is with us again to help us with our engagement and getting the word out. And we'll have a brief agenda item about that later on. But the focus of our evening is the continuing on the topic area discussions. Transportation is up this evening, and we have with us Travis Pollock and Mara Holland, 2 of our really great transportation planners here at MAPC, and they'll be walking us through that content for tonight. In addition to that, we are also going to sneak in some agenda items before that, most focused on the revised draft vision statement, which we took another look at based upon your feedback at the last meeting, and we'll just walk you through that. And then we, as I mentioned, have a brief community engagement update, and then we'll talk briefly about some next steps and give the public the ability to comment at the end if so necessary. All right, so let's dive right in. With each of the meetings, the committee put these values and expectations together for yourselves in your very first meeting, and we just bring them to mind each introduction. Open-mindedness, respect, addressing conflict head-on, being organized, transparent, goal-minded, and respecting history without fearing change. Those were the objectives for the group, and I think our conversations have followed those pretty closely so far, and we'll keep those in mind as we discuss the topics this evening. So for those of you who don't know, who are joining us as attendees this evening, The steering committee membership is available on the screen, as you see. Looks like we have a good portion of those members with us this evening and have had excellent participation from those committee members, and we thank them again for all the time and effort they're putting into this process. And they're well representative of various committees, boards, and bodies in the town. So thank you for that representation as well. So diving right into the revised draft vision statement, I believe this is version 3.0, and we are, I think each one has gotten better. I haven't felt like any of them is that bad, but I do agree that each iteration is better than the last. So let's get right into it. A few things. So this is responding to the comments we heard last meeting, which, if I could summarize very briefly, focused on that the vision statement version 2.0 seemed very general. It could apply to any town, not very many specific things about Dedham. So we did try to include a few more specific phrases regarding Dedham and making that clear, including into the specifics of our conversations we've been having. And then I think the other big move here was based upon the discussion we had about the legacies and history of Dedham and how those need to be a focus of the vision and brought forward. We did bring some of the language which was in the bullet points previously up into the body of this main phrase here that you see on screen, and then adjusted some of the bullet points to fall in line with this. So, and I think the language here is a little more ambitious and has less qualifiers than we had previously. That was another comment. So let me just go ahead and read this just briefly. So since its founding, Dedham has been a community striving to reach its ideals and advancing a forward-thinking vision. Dedham is a vibrant community with diverse and safe residential neighborhoods, thriving in convenient commercial and neighborhood centers, and rich and well-managed natural and historic assets. As Dedham looks to 2030, it is the time to renew stewardship of the town's great heritage and bring focus to defining new legacies of sustainability and inclusivity. In order to build this vision into new legacies, the master plan defines specific goals and strategies to advance environmental, social, and economic sustainability and inclusivity that is supported by a strong foundation of fiscal responsibility, allowing the town to confidently pursue its vision. So that, again, this is a lot of the specifics that are called out here is our responses that were mined from the initial community survey and from the virtual workshop in April, and then has been refined with your input. I rather like this statement, but I will pause here and, well, let me show you the next slide just briefly, and then we can see your reactions to this version. And then we do have a bulleted list which leaps off from the slide previous. So Dedham is committed to achieving this vision by, and then we've got continued expanding equity with a focus on quality public education, continued commitment to the first public school in the country, and empowering learning opportunities such as workforce development, striving toward inclusiveness in the town by increasing access to quality housing, better transportation choices, and economic opportunity, celebrating the diversity of ethnicity, culture, and nationalities found in Dedham's communities and neighborhoods, creating a community where residents of all backgrounds and ages can thrive and be healthy, strengthening the unique assets of each neighborhood to build vibrancy and unity across the town, managing growth strategically to benefit compact neighborhoods, vibrant business districts, thriving employment centers, and active transit hubs, supporting stewardship of historic, cultural, and natural assets to provide high-quality shared amenities, and balancing these commitments with an understanding that they are all interconnected. So you can see how some of that has shifted around. If you recall back to the version 2 of this. So I will stop here and invite any of your committee member reactions.
So if I may, Mr. O'Brien, and hopefully as a preface, I sent this as an email. Jay O'Brien also provided some statements on what he thought the vision or some of his ideas. So Jay, if you want to say a few words. So since you were the first to raise your hand.
Okay, to be honest with you, I find no difference from the last vision statement to this one. And I think it's very important. I heard some comments last time that said that history is not important, and I don't know how long people who made that statement have been living in this town, but Dedham has lived and thrived on what it's been in the past, and it's not just any old town's past history. I mean, there were reasons. I mean, our founding people came here, and they when they came here, they just didn't start chopping down, you know, the woods to put up a house here, a house there, whatever else like that. They sat down and worked together to come up with an agreement, and they called it a covenant and a compact in order to live together in a certain society. So I mean, Dedham's been progressive since its very beginning, and I think that should be known, that anybody that looks towards this town realizes this town's been progressive throughout history. There are people, a lot of people who wouldn't know anything about the history wouldn't realize that I'm working with Brian Keeney we have a committee going to set up a monument to an ex-slave who came here from Dedham. He escaped from Charlestown down in South Carolina on a rowboat, just on his own with maybe 4 other slaves on a rowboat, went out into the ocean, took luck through his hand, was picked up by a federal transport troop, which he was lucky by that, because otherwise he wouldn't be telling this story, and served his time throughout the United States Navy, and then came here to Dedham to live. Well, why did he come to Dedham? What made Dedham so special? What, that an ex-slave could have lived anywhere else in the United States, but he came here to Dedham. And there has to be a reason for that. And if people don't know the history, how do they know that Horace Mann lived here? Or Brandeis lived here? These people didn't live here just because they picked it as a community to live here. They picked it for a reason. And when I see these lists of dots on a thing of bullet points, it looks to me like nothing but a grievance. When Dedham has been has been maintaining these bullet points throughout, not just that they're looking to a vision to the future to have this, they've been living it. So that's why I think it's important, in order to include the history of the past, in order to give people an understanding what this town is. It's been like this in the past, and it's continued to live like this in the past, and to be a better community, that we have a willingness to look at if anything that in our past has not been exactly right, but we're willing to look at that past and progress forward more on that, to learn from our past. So that's why I believe it's important. I'm not just saying what I have listed there, and I don't know if anyone's even read it, because unfortunately I put it in basically maybe about 2 days ago. So I don't know if anybody had an opportunity to look at it. But again, I think it's important to have these list of names of these types of people that came here to live in this town. Instead of just having a list of things that appears to be a grievance that the people are taking from other parts of the town or other towns, and figure Dedham's just the same as any other town. And we need to work on these things when they haven't lived in this town long enough to realize the history that we've already achieved a lot of these things from the past. So I'll just leave it there.
Thank you, Jay. No, and I hope everyone had a chance to read it and you put the time in, and we appreciate that. Nate, I believe you were next.
So just responding to Jim's comment, I think all of that is true, but I don't feel that it needs to be in the vision statement. The vision is our statement for, my understanding is to 2030. So I think that having history is important, but the vision, I think it should be cut down a lot. Essentially, I would cut out the first 3 or 4 sentences to just be forward looking for our vision of 2030, right? It's forward looking with adding a history part. So I guess my comment is the fact that we need 2 pages to do our vision is, to me, it's a sign that our vision's way too long. For this is a pithy kind of like high level first page, and then we go on from there. But on the next page, the bullets, I won't have a paramount objection if we stick with these, but I would expect every bullet to have like something that we could bold and, you know, be like expanding equality. And then those following things would be equality. And then strive for inclusiveness. And the following things would all be towards inclusiveness. But we have a weird mix of like, I don't think the things that follow, because you have, everyone has commas and then like 3 or 4 things. I often don't find a lot of relation between the 3 or 4 things to the first thing. So like the second bullet is inclusiveness. And then we talk about housing, transportation, and economic opportunity. And like, I understand that having more economic opportunity for everybody could be an inclusive thing, but it's weird, like that's the way we call it economic opportunity is a way to have inclusiveness. And the one above, we talk about equity. And then we talk, that's when we talk about teaching in schools and that sort of thing. So it's not a paramount objection. I think this is a fine list, but the whole thing is just especially wordy. And I would be a little bit more succinct, even if my comment to this was not succinct.
No, it was succinct, and thank you, Nate. Anyone else? Yeah, Jess.
I'd like to just mention that, Jay, I
Sorry,
appreciate all the effort that you put into educating us on the history of Dedham. Some of the things you pointed out I was unaware of, only having been a Dedham resident for the last 22 years. Would there be any harm to including a historical page in our master plan and not make this lengthy history part of the vision statement, but just maybe having a historic, you know, the history of Dedham as an opening page to the master plan, so that this information can be included for all to be educated by?
Maybe that's a question for Josh in terms of how, you know, how you've done that with other plans, because I could imagine something in like the historic and cultural resources section, or just something in an introduction.
I would love to see it in the introduction myself so that it doesn't get buried.
Yeah, I think we can go into detail in the section that's devoted to it for sure, but I agree, based upon the conversations that we're having, the reactions we're hearing, I think devoting space right where the vision statement, that section that houses the vision statement up at the front of the plan and in the executive summary of the document eventually, a statement on the history of Dedham, which outlines those important historical markers, I think is perfectly fine and very appropriate.
Yeah, so I would just add, I'm going to call on myself, Jeremy.
Feel free.
So I would just add, you know, thanks to Jay, because I also appreciated, I hadn't known about Brandeis in particular. So it was fun to read that and get a little school life. I've only been here 19 years, so I'm still new to Dedham too. I think, and Jay, I just want to clarify, because what I heard you say when you started speaking was that people thought that history wasn't important. And I haven't heard anyone say that. I think that there was just been a question of how to balance kind of a forward-looking vision so that it's rooted in our history and talking about some of the progressive things that Dedham has done since being founded, but also really looking forward. And I also think, I guess I'm curious, and I don't know, maybe the next time we talk about this, it's almost worth having like a polling feature, but when I read the bullets, I don't read that as a list of grievances at all. So I read that as a list of aspirations. And I think the language, you know, I think we all know some of those things we're good at already. Some of them we're still building those muscles. But I don't see that, I don't read it all as a list of grievances. So I think we do want to be careful that it's, you know, it doesn't appear to be a list of grievances. And that may be, you know, this is a working vision statement. I think Josh actually, in a meeting that we had, I guess it was yesterday, Josh mentioned that in some master plans, they actually don't do the vision until that's like the very last step. And so I think we've just, you know, we've been working on this as kind of a working thing that would guide us, but knowing it would continue to evolve as we gather data and have gather more data from the community, gather more, I think, fluency among all of these topics for our steering committee. So I don't think that we need to get it perfect right now. It is an ongoing conversation. But I do think we want to make sure that the tone, we all understand kind of what the tone is. And so I just would be curious to know, are other people reading the bullets as a list of grievances? Or how does that settle with people? Because that would maybe help us get a sense of whether we're close and this is a working thing that we can keep going with, or if we need to really go back and re-examine.
Maybe we get more specific. It's obviously not all the bullets. So if there are specific ones that we could focus in on, that could maybe be, the wording could be changed.
Thanks, Josh. I'd like to recommend that the wording of the fourth bullet down, it says creating a community where residents of all backgrounds and ages can thrive and be healthy. That's almost saying that we haven't done that already. So I can see where James might see that as a grievance, even though it's not intended to be a grievance. So if we could state that more positively and more affirmatively, like continuing to build upon our creation of communities where residents, so maybe just rewording that particular bullet so that it's a continuation of some of the work that's already been done, not as, so because right now it reads as though we haven't done anything. So I would just want to reword that bullet. So maybe maintaining communities where residents of all backgrounds and ages can thrive and be healthy.
Thank you, Sharna.
Jeremy?
Yeah, Shaw, hi.
Hi. To answer Jessica's question, I don't view these bullets as statements of grievance, and I do think they're well done with certain amendments that I would propose. Second, as for the history part, going back to the first page, if you could flip to that, Jeremy, and then I'll get back to the second page. There are 2 points I'd like to make. First, the history of Dedham is in part a reprise of the history of Massachusetts, and a lot of what we strive to accomplish today is embedded in our DNA. That's what makes, this community, the city-state of Boston, of which Dedham is part, really a very unique and treasured place in the history of the entire United States. The history does involve a certain ebb and flow. I mean, the Puritans were one thing; they were good on some things and not so good on others that we could recite. The Federalists, who had their bastion here in the great, disputes that almost started a civil war in 1812, had Fisher Ames, who was the paradigmatic Federalist of that era. And so on it goes. And let me just note that where Brandeis lived on Village Avenue, that was the center of where Felix Frankfurter's wife and others gathered together with Mrs. Sacco, who lived there, to bring a spotlight on the ethnic bigotry that underpinned the Sacco and Vanzetti trial. And so on. I could go give many more examples. The point is that this place is actually incredibly interesting and unique. And what we want to achieve in the future, and what we mention in these things, actually plausibly would not be possible, or would not things we'd be striving for, if we didn't have that history. That's the argument I make. So in particular, page 1, I would say that I would like to borrow Jay O'Brien's words, so that in the 5th line, beginning on the margin to 2013, I'd put, "It is the time to renew the stewardship of the town's rich and unique historical heritage." That's what I would do. I would actually emphasize it even more. And I think that would give a better feeling for the reality of our history, and also for Jay's point. Then going, if Jeremy, if you don't mind flipping to the second page with the bullets, it seems to me that the first bullet is awkward for the reasons that some of the other speakers have talked about, because it kind of has a bunch of phrases together. So I think that if you were to, the focus of that first bullet is public education. So expanding equity in public education based on the imprint of the founding of the first public school in the country would be a good way of sort of bringing those points together. In terms of the workforce development, I'd break that out actually and give it its own special place, and say something to the effect of promote innovation in alternative forms of education, including workforce development. That's what I would do there. And then as for the other, as the creating the community, I take the point that was made, and I would maybe say enhancing the dedication to a community where residents of all backgrounds and ages can thrive and be healthy. Because we do have civic groups that have labored for nearly a decade on this very point. So those are my observations, and if you want me to put them down in paper, I'd do it happily.
I think we got them, right, Josh?
Yep. Yeah.
Thank you, Shaw. And Jay, we're going to get to you in a sec. I know, Andrew, you wanted to talk, right? Or haven't
no, I think I've said it via the chat. I was an advocate of James's approach. I like where this is going. I had sent my own edition, slightly shorter than what James had sent, but along something of the same lines after the first version. And I like where Shaw is going too.
All right. Thank you. Jay?
Thank you. I did like Shauna's input in regards to maybe that would take care of it. What I'm trying to show here is to find that people who lived in this town over 20 years didn't know that. I think that shows even more the importance of placing Dedham's history, which it shows consistency. And maybe as Shauna said, that maybe in the beginning, and then the vision statement, that would take care of that. I know that what's saying, as far as the bullet points go, saying it looks like a list of grievances. I have to be honest with you. I mean, this isn't my opinion, but I've shown this to other people who probably should be part of this, but they've actually looked at it, and there's some people who have lived in this town for a long time were insulted by that, and it made an appearance of list of grievances because of the ideas that I'm trying to stress, that we've been maintaining this, or we started this. So again, with Shauna's suggestion, and I believe I said this previously in the meeting beforehand, if we change some of the bullet points to maintaining this or continuing to achieve the certain items, I think that may take the sting out of what some people may see that we're not doing, or we're starting from scratch, or we've been guilty of not being fair in the past. So I guess that's just my last bit of input there.
Thank you, Jay. So if anyone else that hasn't said anything want to, Justin?
Yeah, may I ask, I just want to, I'm a huge fan of history myself. I think that we live in an entire region of the country that has a great deal of history. And we get taught about parts of history. We don't get taught about parts of history. We also live in a place that people don't necessarily exist in the same place that their parents did for generations anymore. And I think that we have a Dedham that has a bit of an influx in new folks that are new to Dedham, not necessarily new to Massachusetts, not necessarily new to New England, right? But are new. I think I would love to know more of the history of Dedham myself, but I'm starting to wonder a little bit if there are folks that have lived in Dedham for going on 20 years or more and don't know this history that we're talking about right now. And certainly, I think, depending on, it's not entirely dependent on how long you've lived in a town. It's dependent on how much interest you have, and I think a little bit who you become connected with and where you find yourself. There's a lot of things that lead to how much you may or may not know about history. But my point is, I'm struggling to understand how much this history has to do with or has an impact with how folks in Dedham are going about their everyday lives right now. Is it this much? If there are folks that are are on our elected bodies that don't know these things, but they are operating and making policy and leading discussion on these things, but they don't know these things. How much is it actually impacting our everyday thought?
Okay, if I may, this is Andrew. I'd actually like to address that.
Go for it, Andrew.
I think actually what it does is it sets context. And what I mean by that is people may look at some of these objectives and say, why are we putting that there? What's that got to do with Dedham? And I think it can be helpful. I mean, the master plan has an educational mission as well as a planning mission to have people understand that many of these things are not new, that they have been things that have been objectives have been going on for a lot of time. So when we talk about inclusiveness, this isn't some Johnny-come-lately brand newfangled idea. We haven't always lived up to it, but it's been there from the beginning. This is not a set of grievances, as James has said. This is a long-standing character of the town, and that we're committed to being better than we have been. We're also willing to recognize that we have had these standards, that we've had these objectives for a long time. And I think it could be helpful for policymakers, exactly the people you're pointing to, who may be new, who maybe are looking at to look at this document, say, by doing this thing, I am not doing something completely new. I'm in a tradition. We have a tradition, and we have an ethic of inclusiveness, of progressiveness that is, not just something that people have dreamed up in the last 2-3 years.
Thank you, Andrew. So a couple more comments and then we got to move on. And it sounds like this is definitely going to be something we're going to have to continue on. We'll probably let it marinate a little bit. But so last two, Nate and then Jess.
I agree with everything. I mean, all the stuff that was just said, but I don't think any of that was justification to put it in the vision. So, the original suggestion of putting it somewhere separate as a history, like the history of Dedham is really, 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 really long. And to try to fit that in a vision or just pull out the key pieces in a vision, I don't think that's appropriate. So I am in no way saying ignore it, but I'm saying isolate it, reference it in the vision, but the vision is forward looking and just gives a quick nod. But anyways, that would be my preference, is give the history the space it deserves, but have dedicated space, not try to muscle in on the 2030 vision, which is focused on 2030.
Thank you, Nate. Jessica, last thoughts?
Yeah, so I wonder if it's useful to form kind of a smaller working group that might be able to have this conversation, come back to the group with some suggestions in the next meeting or two. I think one of the things that's hard, so, you know, Jay, I heard very much your point that some people saw some of this and took offense and felt like it was a list of grievances or kind of discounted work that had been done. I also know that one of the earlier versions, other people took offense at the idea that that some of these things had been achieved, right? And so I think I think when we talk about history, it's really complicated to think about which parts of history we want to highlight and how we want to do that. And because it is a complex history, right? There's a lot to be proud of, and also a lot of things that, like many towns, you know, we aren't proud of, right? For instance, I know there's a lot of deed restrictions, right, around the race of people who can own houses that historically Dedham had. So I think that it is it's a tricky and complex subject, and it might, right now we keep trying to have this conversation in 10 or 15 minute increments, which become 35-minute conversations. I think it's harder to get there. And so I would suggest if we could, kind of maybe I could follow up with everybody by email and just get some, a group of 5 or 6 people who are willing to kind of hash some of this out and come back to the group with some suggestions and work with Josh Fiala to kind of move forward.
Thank you. Just one more. Diekman wants to, she hasn't said anything, so
Well,
I'll cede the floor.
Yeah, I just wanted to potentially react to the working group idea. I think, Jess, you had mentioned from, in your previous comment, which I agreed with, which is this is something that the vision statement will evolve as we actually develop the plans and as we all start to see what shape the actual vision takes, or not the vision, but what the plan actually takes. And I'm wondering if it might be better to just sort of put a hold, come back to this as each of the elements start to solidify and we see sort of some of the main things that come out of our plan elements, and then we can come back and refine the language, maybe within a working group or maybe not. But I think that this might benefit from further development of the plan itself.
If I could weigh in on that just a little bit. I think I agree with both of those approaches. It's a little, for me, I think 3 strikes and I'm out, I guess, a little bit. I'll stay involved in the process, but this is my 3rd try. I would appreciate having some additional working group help to move this vision statement to it's still a working draft, but move it to a place where people can feel comfortable with it. And then I think it is valuable for the process to share it out to the general public when we get to that comfort level. And then we can keep it working as a working draft throughout the process and refine it and make it even better. But I think still yet we haven't achieved that status of progress where we can even get it out to a larger audience to show people the progress we've made and where this whole process is headed in a way.
So, so you want to do the subcommittee thing?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think coordinating through Jessica for those who might be interested in that, and then we can set up a time over the next month or two to have more than the 15 or 20 minutes that we're trying to devote to it in the committee meetings, to roll up our sleeves and do some of the very important recrafting of the language and wordsmithing of some of the bullet points to get it right. But we're drafting from an aspirational standpoint, not a grievance standpoint, but I think that's not coming across. So we'd love to get everyone's help on that, whoever's interested in rolling their sleeves with us.
All right, so next step, Jessica, maybe tomorrow you can send an email out to the group and folks can just respond individually if you'd like to work with Jessica and some of your cohorts and further discussing this. And it's going to take some time, and we have a lot more stuff to discuss. So does that sound good to everyone? Yeah, I guess I can't get a unanimous yes, so never mind. Forget about that.
Yes. There's some people nodding.
All right, great.
Great.
And especially in the interest of time, transportation's a large discussion.
Yeah.
So yeah, and thank you everyone. Yeah, it's a deep discussion, and we'll keep going.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So I will transition us from vision statement and just remind us all that the vision statement is responsive to the rest of the content in the plan. So there will be a give and take that we're looking at as we move on. The topic, goals, strategies, and actions want to have a relationship with the vision statement, want to make those connections. And this is the overall hierarchy of the plan content that we're working toward. So in that vein, we've been on a series of meetings. This is our second of topic area discussions where we're devoting as much as we can to of a meeting to a specific topic. Last meeting in July, we talked about economic development. Tonight, we're talking about transportation. Next month in September, we'll be talking about housing, and you can see that sequence on the screen. So the way that we've set these up is we invite the staff planners from MAPC who have been responsible for that topic to provide a brief presentation and give us some existing conditions research, some analysis, some facts and figures for the topic area. And then we invite the committee to discuss and react to that presentation where we're ultimately trying to define priorities and goals within that topic area. Out of these conversations will flow a one-sheet summary for transportation and for economic development that we will then circulate to the committee to begin to define those goals. And I imagine we'll have as rich a discussion about those initial and working draft goals as we are about the vision statement. So we'll be getting deep into each of these topics in short order. And then eventually, and we'll be touching on this in the community engagement update, we are thinking about now the design of our engagement over the fall and how we will engage a broader community in these topics, and how it's best and most meaningful to touch base with existing boards, committees, advisory groups, et cetera, that are focused on these various topic areas and how to get them those draft one-sheeters and reactions to it. And we'll also have an open house in the fall at some point virtually to discuss this in a more open public format as well. So we've taken much of their, without taking any more of their time, we'll pass it over to Travis and Mara to walk us through the transportation and connectivity presentation. So take it away, guys.
Thanks, Josh. Can I get a thumbs up? Everyone can hear me? Yes, okay, thank you. Just want to make sure. So appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all, and we've appreciated the opportunity to work on this. I find master plan work to be really interesting because of the way that it connects many different things in a community when you talk about transportation and economic development and housing and all the things that you're going to talk about. I find it really interesting. And you'll note on this slide here, I called it the topic area is transportation and connectivity. And I use those words because transportation is not just something that happens for the sake of just getting around. It's really something that is important for that mobility is not the goal. It's really the means to connect to things in people's lives, whether it's work, school, daily needs, and social needs. So I think I would want to keep that in mind as we move forward on this, as we talk about transportation and the way it connects to everything. So the sub-agenda that we're going to talk about today, there's really 5 main areas we're going to talk about. We'll talk about the existing infrastructure, and then which are the streets and parking, ped and bike, transit. We'll talk about how people get around. So how do people use that infrastructure? Well, from a little bit of data we have, we can talk about those things. Then I'll talk about that, and Mara as well. And then Mara will talk about the survey results and what we gleaned from the couple surveys that have already been done. And then we'll talk about the challenges and opportunities as we look at the data that we've seen, and then the potential goals in the topic areas. And as Josh mentioned, Jeremy mentioned as well, that there will be a couple points where we'll pause and we'll ask for your feedback as we move through this. So the data sources that we're using for our transportation analysis are really the existing data that we can get from state sources, as well as like the T and MassDOT and CTPS and Mass Development, as well as the feds with census data and other data on economics. There's already been some of the work that the economic development team has done, which feeds into our work, as I mentioned, the survey results. And we have gone and looked at the previous planning studies. I think it's really important to go back and look at those and see what's been done and what's been talked about. We don't want to obviously reinvent things from scratch, and we want to see what's been done and maybe where there's been some good efforts and where we can continue to move forward. So first thing we'll talk about is infrastructure. So what's out there today? And many of you know this, but maybe others don't. So in Dedham, you have over 110 miles of streets and roadways. There are 3 state-maintained facilities: State Route 109, the Providence Highway, and of course the big one is I-95 or Route 128 that skirts through portions of Dedham, and that has 3 exits. And over 3/4 of the town's network is controlled by Dedham. And so we look at that as really an opportunity for the town to make productive changes as you continue to move forward with some of the things that have been done, as a way to continue to knit neighborhoods together and to bring your community further along in some of its goals for more walkability and bikeability and ways to control traffic. To move on. Same things on the infrastructure. Is not just the streets, but also some of the other details on those streets. So 58% of the streets in Dedham have sidewalk on at least one side, but that means that really about 42% don't have that. And even in areas where we have some of the sidewalk infrastructure in Dedham, especially it's larger on the east side in East Dedham and Oakdale and elsewhere, there's always issues. We've seen this elsewhere from reading things of the quality of it or some of the connectivity, and sometimes issues of cars parking on it. So that sidewalk infrastructure is really important because we've seen that from the data we saw from the surveys that people they like things that they can walk to, and they would like to walk more in Dedham. There's very little bicycle infrastructure. We'll talk more about that later. Obviously, the places, as I started to mention, this really varies across the Dedham. Dedham Square is much walkable, East Dedham Square as well, but other areas really don't have the infrastructure as much. You do have the 5 bus routes that go through the town, the most important one being the 34 and 34E. I'll talk about that, as well as the commuter rail stations. But I also point out here, and it's a little hard to see on this map, is that both the railroad and the Providence Highway can create sometimes barriers between movements that are really east-west. So those kind of hash marks you see on the highway, that's where there are signalized intersections that would allow pedestrians and cyclists to cross, or others, and then there are 3 points along the railroad where people can cross as well. But we think that those are really important to note. In terms of parking, there was the economic development study that identified that there's really a lot of parking in Dedham. There's over 10,000 parking spaces that were found and counted in the various economic development areas. Now I say that it doesn't mean that there isn't a parking issue at certain businesses. We certainly know that. We also know that Dedham Square, you've done a couple different studies on parking. We know that that can be an issue as it's grown in its vibrancy, as there's been added businesses, there's parking. And now we have issues like, how do we best use some of the parking when it comes to expanding it for dining or for walking with what's happened with COVID. And certainly we know that there are times when there are events when parking can be an issue, but we know that there's actually quite a bit, in many areas there is a lot of parking. And so we want to think about that a little bit, because we think that we want to be flexible on how that space might be used, or could be either temporarily, as we've seen in some areas, like doing temporary drive-ins this summer, or even permanently repurposed. In terms of if we can go on to the next slide, Josh. In terms of also mobility, so this is, we took looking at first infrastructure, now we're going to talk about how people get around. In terms of mobility, a couple things I found was interesting from looking at the transit ridership and transit data is that there was the commuter rail counts over the last, from 2012 to 2018, Dedham Corporate Center saw almost a doubling of riders, which was greater than the total on the Franklin line. And I thought that was interesting, and I thought maybe it was because of the parking issue, but I know the parking costs had had been reduced, but actually it was before the parking costs had changed. But I just thought it was interesting that I think as Dedham continues to be a place that people see as like a good place to live, you can get to Boston, it's natural that that would happen with the commuter rail ridership, which we've seen across the system. I think it's also interesting when I looked at the MBTA did an analysis of the bus routes, and the 34 is the one that really kind of is the spine that runs through a good portion of the Neponset River area, including Dedham, is that there's like 11% of the total ridership on that route gets on and off in Dedham. And as you can kind of see here, it's a little hard to tell, but basically the circles, the bigger the circle, the bigger there is on the people getting on and off on the inbound. That's what's shown on this map. And as you can see, at Dedham, it starts to really pick up in Dedham. And what we see is that there are a lot of people getting on, as you can imagine, going to Boston, but actually there's quite a few people getting off on the inbound side. So it just reiterates that really you're a place where people come to work from elsewhere, and it's really important that this route is really important for the region and for Dedham. It does, however, as the study shows, it has some real problems with on-time performance, and that's something we'll talk about. As well, also in mobility is traffic. We've heard this a lot from the surveys, and we realize this is something that everyone is very interested in. So where we were able to find traffic data, we could compare it like between maybe 2014 counts to 2019 before the pandemic. We saw on average like a 5 to 11% increase in traffic. The one exception being Washington Street near Denham Square actually saw a decrease in that. There was also recently a study done by MassDOT that looked at congestion along various corridors, and one of the corridors is what they call the Longwood-Dedham corridor, about 10 miles. And they found that this corridor, which is about from 128 up to the Longwood Medical area, had a travel time of around half an hour, but that 10% of the time it averages to about 41 minutes of travel time. And this is interesting because although that can seem like a lot, but actually, I said compared to other corridors, it wasn't nearly as bad. Now, so I don't know if you want to take some like solace that hey, it's not as bad as others, but it was one of the few kind of bits of information we could look at in terms of traffic congestion and look at that corridor, because we know that Boston is again a really important corridor and the whole corridor is because of the workers that were also reverse commuted into Dedham. So in terms of looking at some of those commuting patterns I just mentioned. So looking at the data we have from around 2017, the worker inflow and outflow. So there are about almost 13,000 people that live in Dedham that actually go out to work, around close to 1,400 commute within Dedham. Then you have this large, almost like 17,000 to 18,000 people that come into Dedham on a daily basis, or did, obviously, before the pandemic. I always want to qualify that, that came in. So this shows that, again, I mentioned Dedham is a really important job center, and you know that. And so if we look a little closer at these commuter patterns on the next slide, what this map shows is the dots you see in kind of these colors. This is where people who live in Dedham, this is where they commute to. So as can be expected, you can see that there's the concentrations of workers in Dedham, but also not, surprisingly, if they're going into the Boston area, they're going up to Longwood area, to Back Bay, to the financial district. But also you're seeing some clusters right along 128. And I think that gets to the point that was pointed out in some of the survey. People said, they like Dedham, its proximity to Boston, and its proximity, I think, to 128 as well. Again, about the largest place where people go to work to if they live in Dedham is Boston. About a third of them, 10% of them work within Dedham. Everything else is like in the single digits, and it's spread out all over the map. You have about 80% of people that live in Dedham drive to work, 11% take transit. That's actually lower than the region. It's around, I think, 18% for the region take transit and about 75% drive. Interestingly enough, it's like 6% work from home. I point that out because obviously that's something a lot of people are doing now, and that was something that has increased over time from like 2% from about 10 years ago to 6%. And then people in the households, it's about around 1.5 to 2 cars per household, and you drive about 46 miles a day. That's, I think, pretty close to some of the statewide averages as well. So those are how people who live in Dedham, how they get to work. And on the next slide, in terms of looking at like where those concentrations are a little closer of the employment in Dedham, as I mentioned, so 17% of the people who work in your community come from Boston, around 8% come from Dedham. So I think what that shows is there's a real potential for, if there's improvements in some transit services, some of it obviously is beyond the control of the town, but improvements in transit, improvements maybe in walking and biking infrastructure could really probably make a difference in how people get around from the south side of West Roxbury and other areas and into Dedham and around Dedham. Another thing that we've looked at is the mobility. I'll let Mara talk about some of the ride hail, which is like Uber and Lyft and the TNC data and what we saw with that.
Thanks, Travis. Hi, everyone. I hope you're all doing well tonight. As Travis mentioned, so this slide's about ride hail, like Uber and Lyft rides. And in 2019, over 262,000 rides originated in Dedham. As you can see from this graph, that's sort of in the same category of Boston, Brookline, Cambridge, Somerville. So there's certainly a lot of folks who are utilizing ride hail services in the town to get around. Of those trips, about 23% of them were within Dedham, so folks just trying to get around to different places within the town. Next, Josh, thank you. This graph shows the comparison between rideshare between Dedham and the state as a whole. So as you can see, it's been growing statewide. It's also been growing in Dedham. From 2017 to 2019, the number of TNC trips increased by 75% to just over 262,000, as we saw in the last slide, which is an average of 10.6 trips per resident. And so here we have the average miles per trip that folks are taking rideshare. So in Dedham, folks are on average taking a 6.7 mile trip with a service like Uber or Lyft. And for a trip like that, it could be replaced by a bike trip, could be replaced by a bus trip. And ride sharing in Dedham is growing more quickly than in other municipalities, which could mean an unmet transit need or unmet need in active transportation as well. So we're going to take a quick pause here. We're going to do a couple interactive poll questions to hear what you all think. The first question is, what surprised you or stood out to you in the existing conditions that Travis talked about? And then what do you see as most lacking in Dedham's current transportation infrastructure?
And so these are the same technology that we've used before in past meetings. So if you open up a separate browser window and go to pollev.com/MAPCMTG, you should be able to connect to this question live and then have a similar interface as what you see on the screen. If you type your answer in, it should show up live and interactively on the screen. I think you also have the option on this format of question to upvote other or downvote other responses that you see in that browser window. So once they start populating. We also invite, if anyone wants to raise their hand or just start participating, we invite anyone who wants to give a verbal comment if they prefer not to do the poll everywhere comment.
And Josh, can you just clarify, because we do have some members of the public who are with us. I personally would be okay with hearing from anyone who's on the call. I just want to make sure everyone feels invited to participate.
Sure, yes, I believe that anyone that's able to see the presentation and get to that website or hear us should be able to log into that same pollev.com/MAPCMTG and enter a response.
So it looks like a lot of people are upvoting the so many Uber trips.
Yeah.
That's right, there were a lot. Also Lyft trips. People are mentioning there's a lot of people commuting into Dedham.
Yeah. And those were, I'll admit, those are two things that I found surprising, especially once we had a third year of Uber and Lyft data. You know, it's one thing to have 1 year and then 2 years. You get 3, you're starting to see some trends, you're starting to see some things. And we thought that was very interesting that it's growing at such a clip in Dedham. And I too was a bit surprised at the number of people commuting into the town as well as compared to commuting out. Yep, in terms of the lack of bike facilities is another thing we noted as well. Yeah.
And I will mention while we're at this pause, we did have a question as you both were presenting, Travis and Mara, from Dan about how does the percentage of sidewalks compare to similar semi-urban old towns, if we know that, or we could get that information potentially?
So I'll mention that I don't know how it compares, but we do have what we call other, we can provide that information. I would be interested as well about seeing what that is.
So while this populates, Andrew has a question.
Well, sort of more a comment, because this
Comment,
comes back
sorry.
to something that I've said before, which is I wonder if that large group of people commuting into Dedham is not a stakeholder group that is difficult for us as a committee to reach out to. They're contributing a lot to the town, tax dollars, employment, they're the people who are bagging our groceries and, so on and so forth. And I wonder about our outreach if I suspect that if they thought about it, they might have something they would want to say about this process, but I don't know whether we're able to reach them.
Yeah, good point, Andrew.
It is a good point, and I think we'll have to think about that in terms of how if we can. It's something that I know that we've talked about, and I say we at MAPC, about how do we reach out to people that are working in the area as well as living.
Well, we're a committee of residents, of course, and so we're focused on that point of view as Dedham as a place to live. But for many people, it is a place to work or to do business, and that's a significant point of view as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Andrew. This is Carolina. And I think we can think about that when we're thinking about, how we want to engage on this specific topic, and we can brainstorm this specific stakeholder as part of the transportation piece.
Jay O'Brien, do you want to say something?
I think you're muted.
Jay, you're on mute, Jay.
All right. I was surprised of the many Uber usage, but then again, in some ways I'm not surprised by it. I think once the novelty of the price fare changes, and eventually it will get higher, versus I can see in the future sort of kind of like electric or pedal gas bikes that basically it will be a cheaper transportation than basically what an Uber will be. I actually see the Uber disappearing sooner than we expect. Once there's a better version of people transporting around other than a bicycle, something's a little more step up where there's so much leg pedal needs to be done, such as an electric bike or a lightly gas-powered bike.
Thanks, Jay.
Hey, Paul, Travis.
Yeah. Sure.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about where people are commuting to with relation to where our transportation currently exists. So, are people commuting onto the Route 1 corridor where we don't have transportation? And maybe that's a reason for the increase in Uber and Lyft ridership? Or are people commuting to Dedham Center, or are they commuting to the Dedham Mall area prior to the start of public transportation, prior to the start of the day for the 34 and the 34E buses? So I'm just curious as to, did you do any correlation between where people are commuting and whether there is public transportation available or not?
I think we'll have to, we can look at the data, but unfortunately we just don't have a lot of fine-grained data that would allow us to, I think, look into that specifically to that level of detail. Because I've wondered that myself, like if, for example, people are going into Boston, but 80% of them are driving, like where are they going that maybe they feel like they can't take transit, and then vice versa, like you said, in terms of, I think two of the areas where I think employment in the town is highest, correct, I don't know if anyone correct me on this, I think it's like healthcare and retail are two of your largest employment
Right,
centers, if
I
I'm-
saw that. Mhm.
Yeah. So those are two things where you have, this is something we're seeing, as I'm sure, Sharna, you're aware of that, of things like those trips can start or end before, like you said, like the 34 runs, or they're just, you know, they're not things that work, that you can do work from home, obviously. So I think even if we don't know exactly where, I think the more we can look at like that kind of information, we might be able to tease out some of this in terms of what we're seeing and maybe why. Maybe, you know, if we can talk about improving the 34, maybe it's also just looking at ways we can get some other infrastructure that connects to some of those large employment centers that you have.
I mean, I would imagine that the volume of our retail is concentrated between Dedham Square and Legacy Place. And if you don't have transportation directly to those areas without having to cross a major highway, then that would be a reason for people not to be able to use public transportation.
Exactly.
Because if the first mile, last mile commute connections cannot be made.
Exactly. I think I agree with that. Maybe we move on to the next question in terms of, I think we're already talking about this a little bit. So what do you see as most lacking in Dedham's current transportation infrastructure?
Hey, Andrew, I see your hand up. Did you have a comment question while we're populating this?
Actually, I think I may put this into the population because,
Okay.
but into the comment. So I'll put it in.
Okay.
Let's see. I'm still only seeing the first question. What am I?
Might take a moment to have it communicate back up to the Pull Everywhere app. Are people seeing the new question yet?
No, not
Not
yet.
yet.
No? Oh.
I would like to comment, Jay had brought up people might start riding more either electric bikes or gas bikes. I think that ties into the lack of infrastructure for bicycles though, because even though an electric bike would help you have to pedal less, so you might be able to go farther, not everybody's comfortable riding on the street with cars. So that might not come as quick as one might think with no bike lanes or separated bike facilities throughout the town.
Oops.
It looks like it's working now. Are people seeing it now?
Yeah, I am. I see it as like lack of sidewalks is most lacking, bicycle pedestrian infrastructure. We're seeing bike and ped, dedicated bike lanes. Yeah, first and last mile connections on transit. So
No one voted for monorail. Not yet.
Not yet. Oh, Sharna, you're muted.
I said town trolley. I'm still putting my bid in for a seasonal town trolley.
Seasonal town trolley. Okay.
Sharna, there you go on that history again. I think I just saw at the turn of the century, from the 1800s to the 1900s, there were 6 trolley lines in the town. Dedham was a hub. So.
There we go.
And rail too.
It really was. I look occasionally at the historic aerials to see what's to see kind of like your history, and I can see that it really was a hub. Okay. Interesting. I don't know, Mara, your thoughts are like options for kids, sidewalks and bikes, especially I think as maybe more parents are doing some of the home, school, home from work and schooling as well. I think you and I have talked about that.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some of the kid-related transportation or school-related transportation in a bit, but it is something that is worth thinking about as part of this plan as well.
So Jay, do you want to have a word, and then Diekman?
A little bit more on history. My grandfather said let me see, he was born in 1907. But in his day, you could take a trolley all the way down to Cape Cod. I mean, not the same trolley, but you have to hitch off to different ones. But you can take trolleys all the way down to Cape Cod. But when you look at Dedham, a lot of the road systems that we see, 128, the Veterans Highway that goes into West Roxbury, those are all relatively young coming to Dedham. They're all like built in the 1950s. So, and Washington Street wasn't that wide either. That was just as wide enough for 2 trolleys to go up inside. You didn't too much worry about the cars. There weren't too many cars around in those days. It was the horse. And into the 30s, the horse was still kind of making a big show in comparison to vehicles. So, and it's really within living memory that these changes, and these changes affect how the town. I mean, Washington Street was widened. There's a lot of houses that people don't realize were moved in order to make room to make Washington Street a wider street. There was in Rosendale on the top of Metropolitan Ave, there was a farm up there with cows overlooking the city. In living my mother-in-law's living time. So it wasn't too long ago when Dedham was a little bit different. People used to say when you came to Dedham, you moved to Dedham from Boston, you were basically moving into the country. I'd probably say pretty much like if you were moving to Walpole from here. So it's amazing how fast things change over a short period of time.
Diekman? Thank you, Jay.
About history, one of your previous slides was talking about commuter rail ridership, and it showed a huge increase for Dedham Corp Center. How much of that do we think is correlated to the development, the apartment development, or did the increase come way later?
I'd have to be, so I was a little hard to hear, Diekman, but I think you're asking about in terms of the ridership on the corporate center commuter rail station and how much of that is from the apartment complex across the tracks.
Yep.
Honestly, don't know. I'd have to look into. I'm sure someone could tell me. Is like, when was that built? Was it around 2014 or so?
No, 10 years ago.
Oh.
Okay, so it really
actually over 10 years.
Oh,
so
okay.
it came way later. That's interesting.
Okay.
Because yeah, I think that the question is talking about sort of lacking transportation infrastructure, but I think some of it is the infrastructure around it that would support it. And I think the demonstration of the success of Dedham Corporate Center could be linked to some of that housing and density surrounding it.
Right. Maybe. Josh, should we
Jeremy?
move on?
Jeremy?
Yeah, Shaw, go for it.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't quite hear what Diekman was saying, though I thought what she was saying was very important. But something came in your audio, Diekman. It just didn't project. But I was going to say that one of the considerations here is the connection between this transportation and back to economic development. And again, focusing on the Dedham Corporate Center, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for economic development around the Dedham Corporate Center based on some of the leading edge things in our Massachusetts economy, i.e. biotechnology, healthcare, other technologies, and the enhancement of the ability of people to get to the Dedham Corporate Center for those activities may increase. So all I'm saying is that when we think about transportation in key places, we ought to think also about future economic development impacts and the kind of transportation support that you would want for those impacts.
Good point.
Thank you,
In
Shal.
particular, the Dedham Corporate Center.
Right.
So one, Josh and Travis and more, I guess one more question and we should be moving on.
Sure.
Andrew, last comment?
Since I was the one to put in the comments about kids and elders, I guess I just wanted to make clear, I think those are major quality of life issues for those populations. Frequently the time when someone has to move out of their home as they age is the point when they can no longer drive if they can't otherwise get to shopping or the things that you need to do. And so to the extent that we're a community where you have to drive to get around, you kind of limit your population to people who can drive, who are in that age bracket and in that socioeconomic bracket. And for kids, I mean, I was fortunate enough to grow up in a place where I could get around pretty well as a kid. So I could take myself to the movies. I could take if I had a sporting event, I could get myself to the field. I could do that. And I want to make sure for our kids' quality of life and for families' quality of life that kids have that freedom and the ability to get themselves around, to take themselves to places that they need to go. We shouldn't necessarily focus only on those people who are of driving age and of driving, of driving income, if you will.
Thank you, Andrew. And so moving on, one last point, and this is more for MAPC, Howard Ostroff wrote, and thank you, Howard, that the 34 and 34E have actually swapped serving the Dedham Mall since the data I believe you showed. And I don't know, I'm guessing Howard's probably correct. So just a point of note.
Thanks. We'll look at that, but yeah, they've tweaked the 34 and 34E since that data analysis was done. Okay, I'll let Mara continue.
All right, thank you everyone for your comments and for your poll responses. We have a few more poll responses later that we'd love your feedback on. So we had 2 community surveys that we put out. The first one was an initial survey that kind of covered a little bit of everything. That was open from March through April, I believe, or May. And that one I think received about 1,100 responses. And then we had a second survey that was specifically around transportation, a topic survey that I believe received around 750. Is that right, Josh?
Yep, 783.
Somewhere around there. So this information is from our first survey, and that talked about in general everything kind of related to Dedham. And the second most important topic needing to be addressed in the master plan was addressing traffic congestion. The fourth was improving safety for pedestrians and cyclists. And the 9th was improving access to transit. So of all the things that the master plan does address, it was these items related to transportation were pretty high. Traffic congestion was the greatest challenge, tied with cost of living. And 84% of people noted that safe travel and commuting options were either important or most important for the future of Dedham. So we can go to the next. So to give you kind of a preview of some of the questions, what are the greatest challenges for the town of Dedham? And as you can see in this word cloud that we kind of pulled from all the responses, parking, traffic, and congestion were like some of the 3 biggest ones. You can see pedestrian is in there, businesses, green, things like that. So you can kind of get a sense of what people were thinking of when they responded to that question. As far as in the assets and opportunities questions, the #1 thing that people said attracted them to live in Dedham was the proximity to Boston, as well as the greatest asset of Dedham was its proximity to Boston. #2 was convenient access to highway and commuter rail. So clearly a lot of folks who live in Dedham are interested in moving around outside of Dedham, or mobility is important for folks. If you look at the third bullet here, method for getting around Dedham, we can see that very often 82% of people drive alone in Dedham, which is a very high number. And then we look at 55% of people walk very often. And then if you look at occasionally, the highest number there is walking at 36%. And then we have biking at 28% and commuter rail at 24%. So there are folks that are interested in using these other modes besides driving, but might not have the current access or ability. So here, look at another question. What is your top priority for Dedham in the next 10 years? As you can see, number one right there was walkability. We also kind of see rail trail, housing, space that might have been associated with green space, might have not been. And transportation is also in there as well. So these are really pressing topics for a lot of folks in Dedham that we wanted to highlight in some of these initial survey results questions that we got. So now we're moving into the results of the second survey that we did, that was the topic survey that was specific to transportation. So this question, what are the most important challenges facing the town of Dedham in terms of transportation? Sorry, that got cut off a little bit. So as you can see at the bottom there, the most important was strengthening safe walking and biking in the town. So that's, and then the second was reducing or managing traffic congestion. So we'll go to the next one. On most days, how satisfied are you with the ease of travel in Dedham? Those top sections of columns there, you can see that those are the things that people are dissatisfied by. And the number one mode of transit that people were most dissatisfied was travel by bicycle in Dedham. Second was travel by walking, and then very close third was travel by transit, which includes rail and bus. Next one. And then what transportation improvements would best meet your travel needs? Most people said improved sidewalks. A lot of folks, you know, as we saw in one of the previous ones, said that they enjoy walking around, or they do walk around Dedham. So improved sidewalks would help a lot of people move around. Reducing traffic congestion, and then protected bike lanes also came in the top three. So this slide is looking at crash clusters, and there's a couple things I want to point out to you on the map. But looking to the left first, 60% of the crashes in Dedham involved pedestrians and 40% involved cyclists. 50% of the head crashes were in locations without sidewalks, and all of the cyclist crashes were in areas without bike lanes or bike infrastructure. And unfortunately, 85% of those collisions resulted in fatal or non-fatal, but serious or some injury to the pedestrian or cyclist. And so if you look at the map here, the bluish green teal coloring is where at least 25% of that population is non-white. As you can see, there's a lot of crashes that are either within those sections or close nearby. So there is a cluster of crashes. We noticed when looking through the data that there's a lot of places where crashes continue to happen. So these areas may be quote unquote low-hanging fruit for the town to implement infrastructure such as crosswalks or bike infrastructure, things like that. Sorry, one more thing on that slide, Josh.
All right.
And then also noteworthy, if you see the little green squares, it also shows the vehicle crash clusters. So all the way to the right, you can see number 23. So there's 10 vehicle crash clusters there. There's also a 14 and a 30. So you can kind of get a sense of where there's a lot of crashes from vehicles, pedestrians, and cyclists in Dedham. This map is a little bit hard to read, but the bicycle and pedestrian plan for Dedham was created in 2014, also with the help of MAPC. And this plan identified a lot of improvements that could happen for the town in terms of walking and biking infrastructure, and some in terms of great connections, some in terms of low-hanging fruit, which would be fairly quick or more simple projects to put forward. So this plan is a great opportunity to look at and prioritize and implement some of these projects, as we've seen that there is an interest and a current use of biking and walking in Dedham, but not the most amount of infrastructure that supports that. So here, for those of you who aren't familiar, Safe Routes to School is a program of the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. It's statewide, and there are coordinators throughout the state that work with schools on sort of active transportation modes for kids, for getting kids to and from school. This could include walking, biking, I think they call it rolling. So it could be biking, skateboarding, scootering, all those other types of micromobility that a lot of kids like to use. And in Dedham, there are 5 schools that participate in the Safe Routes to School program. The Avery Elementary School, Dedham Middle School, Oakdale Elementary School, Riverdale Elementary, and Green Lodge School. And as was mentioned earlier in the Poll Everywhere questions, there is a real interest and then also benefit to ensure that kids can develop habits, can be independent and be able to get to and from school either on their own or with other groups of kids safely. This could also help reduce traffic if parents are dropping their students off in the morning, or reduce bus traffic as well if we improved the ability of students to get to and from school for other modes.
So, and
I think I'm going to turn it back to Travis here at the slide.
Thanks, Mara. So the other thing, as like we said, we've been looking at this data. We're coming with what are the challenges and opportunities, as Mara mentioned, the challenges with the crashes, but the opportunity of having some good plans and I think some good buy-in from the community to continue try to improve sidewalks and bikes and for all users, for kids going to school and people who need to get elsewhere. And then when we looked at some of the other things some of these other topic areas, we saw like the challenges of parking. So I think I put here like the reusing of the spaces, trying to be as flexible as we can, whether it's on street parking or the larger surface lots, to just maybe like look at the zoning or the codes and try to allow things to develop over time, reusing space. This picture shows like a large parking lot that was turned into an urban farm, for example. Not that would happen at all parking lots, but it's an example of something that could be done if you had something like a lot of extra parking someplace. Even just greening up the parking space to be a little bit more inviting of like a place where people can go. Actually, Walmart is really doing this a lot. Starting to look at this as some of their areas as a way to make people understand that you can go to Walmart and actually maybe have a place that can be like a community space as well. And then, as I mentioned before, the opportunity for managing, to continue to look for ways to manage the parking in Dedham Square. So in terms of the traffic growth, yes, a lot of traffic can come from outside. I mean, we certainly see that from people coming in, but there's also an opportunity to think about like, well, part of the traffic is really just people in our community right here. So, how can we're seeing that with the ride hail growth. I think if we improve the ped access and the bike access and improve safety, people, as we just keep talking about, will feel more comfortable about maybe being able to get from A to B in their community, by bike and walking. In terms of transit, the opportunity is, it's not up here, but I think one of the opportunities is once people maybe start going back to work, coming in, is how do we get some of that better infrastructure so that people can get to commuter rail and to bus. But really maybe thinking about like improving the on-time performance of the bus. That's one way the T can really help improve the access for everyone, is by doing some of those things to improve the on-time performance of the 34E, maybe with some signal prioritization elsewhere. So yeah, we can go on it. So I think one of the challenges and also an opportunity is what's happening right now. And I think one of the things that people keep asking is like, well, how is COVID impacting transportation today, and how should we move forward? And I think it's a really interesting question. I do want to, and we are actually researching this at MAPC as well, for not just for Dedham, but for all of our communities. So I think based upon the research we've done, what's happening is that COVID is really accelerating existing trends. So as I mentioned, work from home was already going up. It's just increasing more. People are becoming more and more comfortable with it. And so some of the things are changes in retail. I mentioned retail is one of your largest employers, but retail is changing as well, not only by how people like what they insist on happening in terms of retail and where they get things, but the delivery. We're seeing growth in e-commerce. I think, where Dedham sits in terms of its proximity to Boston, people said that's a great asset. I think that will continue to be an asset because, we are seeing some analysis that shows that maybe people are saying, well, if I live in a 600 square foot condo, it's kind of hard to work from home, and I got kids and everything. And so I want to have a little bit more space, but it's not binary. I think these choices are not binary. It's not a matter of 600 square feet in Cambridge and then a huge house out in, way out on 495 in the wood. I think a place like a mature suburb town like Dedham could be a real asset for people if we continue to allow those things that allow them to, walk and find access in other ways. And I mentioned here, like WFH, work from home, it won't be all the time. I think only 19% of people in a recent survey said they wanted to work from home all the time, 5 days a week. So even if people are going in eventually they'd like to go back to the office. If nothing else, a couple days a week. If Boston continues to be that draw, or if Dedham continues to be that draw, we want to find ways that they can get to work that doesn't involve driving and creating traffic. As I mentioned, that connectivity to park, again, the quarantine respite, how can you get out and get connected without having to, to meet with the crowds. The big unknown is traffic. We are seeing, so from the data we're seeing from some of the cell phone data that's out there and what MassDOT is collecting, traffic went way down. It's gone back up. If you look at the county, Norfolk County as a total, I think traffic is just about where it was pre-pandemic, which is a little difficult to imagine, but that's actually happening. So I think we'll have to see like what the impacts are on that and continue to monitor that. We move on. Next slide. I think we'll have another question here. So we've talked quite a bit about the top priorities for improving transportation in Dedham. And so we'd like your vote here in terms of like what you think they should be. And if something's not there, we can maybe take a pause and get people's input as well. But we'll let you look at these lists here. We have bike infrastructure, increasing walkability, increasing the train frequency or the bus frequency, adding a bike share service. We haven't talked a lot about that, but there's no bike share in Dedham. That's something that many communities are looking at. How we think about our overall street network, like not just, we've talked a lot about walking, but maybe it's how do we maybe make some of those quick changes to make it more multimodal, safety, traffic congestion, Americans with Disabilities Act compliance as well. So I'll pause here and I'll let people vote.
Hey, if I may, Diekman, I know you had a couple of questions. Do you want to say them verbally, or are you good in the comments?
Well, I didn't think my mic was working, so I just figured it was better. So is my mic working now?
Yeah, a little bit. I think if you want to yell, we could definitely hear you.
I feel like I'm yelling. Yeah, I just wanted to know when you talked about the transit opportunity, not just focusing on on-time performance, although that is important, but I think increasing the frequency is really important, and a potential opportunity. And then just when we're talking about safety for bikes and pedestrians, we live in the Northeast, and much of the year there's potential for snow and ice, and I personally have a really hard time getting to and from the train station in the winter, even after the sidewalks are plowed, they're still dangerous and slippery. So I think keeping that in there as a key barrier and something to be addressed if we want to continue to encourage biking and walking is important.
Thank you, Diekman.
I'll just say that I saw Dan's hand, but I'll just real quick. how do we address that in terms of the winter with the snow and ice on the sidewalk is something a lot of communities, a lot of cities across the country are trying to figure out how to address. And I think maybe we can look at some of the best practices of what areas have done to do that as we move forward with the master plan effort. Dan?
Sure, just quickly on, it ties into just a couple of different points, but on increasing the frequency, I forget now, I think it's 3 years ago maybe, they actually reduced the number of stops at the Endicott station, made it inconvenient for a lot of people as far as traveling on the commuter rail. It pushed me to go to the Reedville station, which I know is outside of Dedham's borders, but I will tell you the platform when I'm down there, many times I would see quite a few people that lived in Dedham. So that's another stop that's not in, technically purview here, but it is a commuter stop, commuter rail stop that comes into play. But then when you're talking about the frequency, it's my experience taking the commuter rail now for 16 years that there's actually been more of a push to have people, I believe, go to Denim Corporate Center and less so for the Endicott stop, that there's been a reduction in frequency there. I'm not sure about bus service, but it just seems on the commuter rail, that's been the approach I've experienced.
Shaw, did you want to say something?
Just to pick up on what Dan said, I've been a commuter rail traveler for almost 40 years, I think. And I use every stop that's been mentioned, but also 128, which isn't partially in Dedham, though mostly in Westwood. And so just for the technical folks in the MAPC, thinking about connectivity to 128 station, making that more accessible without having to drive there would be an interesting opportunity.
Thank you.
And just one other thing, I think when this commuter rail vision that is being looked at, it seems like Reedville is sort of, they're looking at Reedville as a little bit different. That's more sort of like urban rail, high frequency, and I don't know how that is going to potentially impact the service on Endicott and Dedham Corp Center. So we should continue to track that.
I think an opportunity that we're missing as traffic becomes more of a problem in our community is I'd have to agree that the scheduling of the trains is forcing more people to utilize Dedham Corp and also to utilize Reedville, particularly because Reedville has multiple train lines that service that station. But getting to Dedham Corporate has become more and more of a challenge due to the traffic congestion, because there's no way to get there other than to drive a single occupancy vehicle. So I think if there were a way to solve for or to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips into Dedham Corporate Center and still provide access to people to use that location, it could be a win-win, reducing traffic and saving on the parking fee. And, I think that's something that that should be explored.
Thanks. No, the infrastructure to the commuter rail is something I think we'd want to obviously encourage. When we look at what the infrastructure is out there, the Dedham Corporate Center, it's quite lacking. It really is in terms of the ped and bike infrastructure. And I appreciate the comments on the other commuter rail stations just outside of town. It's something I hadn't really thought about, so that's really a really good point. I don't know if we should move on, Josh, for the interest of time. We did a few more slides.
Yes, please.
Okay. So in terms of topic areas, we've talked about these somewhat already. In terms of parking management, we think about how can we use data to think about where those loading zones, whether it's the TNCs, the Uber and Lyft and deliveries, commercial areas to better manage parking. The repurpose, we've already talked about that, like farmers markets, creative use. And I just think also we should be mindful that as retail, our brick and mortar retail develops, that we'll probably have less need up front for parking, and it's more about pickup, drop off, people like ordering stuff online and doing it. I will want to mention here in terms of electric vehicle and autonomous vehicles, this is something that's come up. There is some incentives for where EV charging stations are done, and as I mentioned, like being flexible in parking and design, because not that I think by 2030, there's no indication that by 2030 there'll be fully autonomous vehicles taking people with no driver in them. But I think we should be mindful that, again, parking will evolve and how we use parking and how we use that real estate. And we want to be flexible in how that is. So we're not, in even like structured parking, allow the building to be reused for other things if it's not being used for parking, or if it is being used by parking, that, you know, cars in the future could park themselves tightly and there isn't as much space needed. So I think we want to address those in the plan. Next slide. In terms of transit access, we talked about this, maybe about looking at priority lanes, maybe in the peak period for the 34 signal prioritization. It's been successful in some places and around Boston where they're doing it. It's saving time. And there's just a little, like even a 5 minute, if it's 5 minutes, it means a lot to people if they're saving 5 minutes, but also if it just means that it's more reliable. And of course, as mentioned with frequency, the more often the buses can get from the start and end of their trips by doing that, the more, the faster they make that trip, the more frequently they can make the trip again. And that actually is a way to increase frequency without buying more buses. So not that Dedham is the only spot for the 34, but that's something to think about. And then as we talked about in terms of safety, safety is something that impacts all users, but it's particularly the ped and bike users because they're most likely to be injured or die in terms of if there's crashes. Mara, I think, did a good job talking about where those clusters are for the vehicle crashes and for the ped and bike crashes as well. And look for that, maybe those are the areas that should really be concentrated on improving the safety for ped and bike, for better signalization, better lighting. So I mentioned the connectivity, maybe they could use the TNC funds, so those Uber and Lyft funds that come in, and looking for other funding grants that the state may have, and now the MPO has perhaps some that can improve the bike connectivity. And we think that, you know, there's really neat things that people are doing or that communities are doing that are just the temporary things with the temporary, maybe dining spaces you've seen in some communities, but even the, you know, putting out the cones and signage and says, this is our new like walk path along the street, or it's a bike ped path along the street. And it's a way that you can just try things out. It's a way you're trying a pilot and you're actually holding a public meeting at the same time is what I would like to call it. Because people will let you know, yeah, this is really good, or you've completely messed the street up. Why did you do that? And you can say, well, we'll move the cones, we'll move things around. So there's ways to do that that are great. And Mara mentioned the safe routes to school. We're using that as a way to improve that as well. And so what we really want to do is, you know, find ways that we can improve safety and walkability and bikeability or other micro transit services, whether it's the electric bike, and make that healthy choice the easiest choice. In terms of and also, one other thing we've seen, and this is not unique to Dedham, is how do you move on to implementation? Because a lot of times you'll have plans. We've talked about the 2014 bike and ped plan. You'll have other ideas, and you know, how do you get that to action? I think it's really important that we could look at what other communities are doing, like Stoneham have found ways to, you know, have a committee that really just looks at implementing a plan. Like that's really what they concentrate on: identifying low-hanging fruit, bringing in the stakeholders, doing a better job of maybe if you have different committees of coordinating those committees and those departments. And we can certainly, you know, work with you on identifying what those are and maybe some of the best practices as well. So with that, I'll move on to the last couple questions, I think. Are these the topics you see as crucial? We talked about like parking, we talked about ped and bike. Are we very close? Are we close, not close, none of the above as we move forward?
So while we populate this, Jay, do you have a comment?
It was more of a question, and I don't know if there's an answer to this, but I think I'd be curious to find out as far as the accidents go in dealing with the bicycles, how many people on the bike who were on a bike that were victims of an accident from Dedham versus the cars that have done the injury. to see where they're coming from, if they're living outside of Dedham, and just using Dedham as a cut through to get to one of the major routes like 95 or Route 1.
So I don't know if we, and all we have is really data that's just aggregate. They just talk about where the crash clusters are based upon usually the last 3 or 5 years. We don't get down to the details of the crash data. I think if you actually did probably what they do in terms of working with other transportation departments, they'll do like a road safety audit. They'll look at those crashes in greater detail within a certain, and that could be something we could recommend be done, is as you look at the specific geography, you drill down on what those crashes are and what happened. And I don't know if we would actually know maybe where they're coming from, but you could get to more detail than what we have here for the master plan purpose.
And if I don't mind, members, while this is going, we do have some great community stakeholders that are with us tonight. I just want to open the floor up to them. If they have any comments or want to be heard with the group. Otherwise, feel free and continue to digest all this. And thank you for joining us tonight. Feel free to raise your hand if you want to be recognized. And of course, to committee members.
Jeremy, I see that Vivian Ortiz has put something in the chat. Vivian, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Vivian, as she said. I don't know if I can switch it over so y'all can see me.
Yeah, we can make that happen.
Okay, thank you.
So Vivian, go for it.
All
We
right,
do have
here
the presentation up. So, I think folks can still see you.
No, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. They don't need to necessarily see me. I will be in Dedham soon, working with folks at the different schools to see what we can do about improving arrival and dismissal and making sure that all of the forms of transportation that are available are being used. So I have been working, as Mara had presented as she had said in the presentation, with a lot of the principals in Dedham for a bit now, and really excited that I have now found out about the Active Transportation Working Group. So working with that team also to see what we can do to make things much more walkable and bikeable. I happen to live in Mattapan and was at the bike rodeo that the police department did a couple of weeks ago, and rode my bicycle from Mattapan to Dedham. And I can agree, there are a lot of things that we can look forward to adding to make it much more walkable and bikeable. So thank you for having me, and thank you for letting me introduce myself.
Thank you.
Thank you. So in the interest of time, can we move forward, Travis and Josh?
Yeah, I think we just had maybe one more question. I don't know if we have time, we could talk about if people want to type in a few comments on major challenges to implementation. If you just like maybe 5 to 10 words, like what are those challenges that you sometimes see like moving from plan to implementation? This is our last question. This is the last slide for transportation. And if you don't want to type, we can certainly take it in the chat. We could, if you want to, think about it. Okay, we're getting some answers. And we can always take an answer later. Okay. Financial commitment. Yep. Okay. Addiction to automobile and demand for road space. Yeah, that's interesting as well. I think as we were talking at MAPC, like how do we just, we have often the infrastructure, we have the right of way. It's just a matter of how we allocate it and how we can, like I said, try those things that can be done on a pilot. A lot of communities are doing that as ways. You don't have to try to spend the millions of dollars. You can use temporary tape, paint, various bollards, you know, the plastic stanchions, to try things out and try different options to see what happens, and as a way to connect things.
Yeah, if I could jump in, Travis, to kind of second that point, we've seen pilots and sort of temporary materials be used a lot in the inner core region recently in the last few years. You all may be aware of how successful Everett's pilot of the bus priority lanes were. To my knowledge, they didn't do any community meetings at all. They put out cones and had the bus go through and had people just use it and see how it feels. And so those are really great opportunities to just try things and bring residents through, bring parents through, elected officials, you know, city staff, town staff, and have people try it out, see what adjustments need to be made. So it is a great technique that's being used quite a bit in the region.
There's some, and yeah, I agree. And we're seeing communities try that elsewhere with all kinds of things. Very interesting responses. I'm just looking at them as they move around. So the standards for modeling and engineering. We're seeing, thankfully, some changes in that in terms of how the standards are being used and how they're being looked at. And actually, Boston area is leading that way in terms of what we're seeing, the trip generation books that are being done to recognize that they're often maybe overestimating the number of trips and that are by cars. And so how do we avoid that self-fulfilling prophecy, and how can we make sure that something is really prioritizing all users? Appreciate it.
Thank you, Travis. So it looks like this has settled down a little bit. Any last thoughts on transportation? And thank you, everyone, for making this an interactive experience. MAPC, any of the board committee members, any last thoughts on transportation? And ultimately, Andrew and Josh to talk about, you know, where we go from here. I think it's similar, obviously, to community development or economic development, but if you just want to tie it together on next steps on that.
Sure, yeah. So all of the information you've entered in Poll Everywhere this evening, we'll have as a record, and we'll be looking at that, Travis and Mara and myself. The discussion has been really rich and useful this evening. What we'll be doing now with your feedback is pulling all this together into what we're calling a one-sheet summary, which will be a front and back of a sheet of paper where we cram as much information about transportation into it as possible, frame existing conditions in such a way that they clearly define and lead to some working draft goals for the topic area. And then we will get that to the committee to begin review and refinement with you all. And we'll be doing the same thing with economic development. And we'll get those, you know, our plan is to get those in the next month or two, so that we'll have a rolling set of information so that you can review those before these conversations get too far back into the past.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you. So we'll shift really quickly. We're almost done with the full agenda this evening, so thank you for holding on with us. But I just wanted to give Carolina a moment to give us a brief community engagement update with some specifics about the posters as well.
Hi everyone, it's Carolina. So just a quick update on where we are with the posters. We have sent them over to the town. We have our final posters put together, and we are basically going to be creating an outreach plan right now. So the outreach working group and of course Michelle, Jeremy, and Jess and others have been helping to think about how we should distribute some of these. So we're basically coming up with a plan for that. And ideally it's going to be across you know, the entire town, thinking about alternating all the posters throughout the town to have a good, you know, a wide dispersal, and having volunteers to help get these posters up quickly. In addition to that, we're we're putting together a press release that will be in conjunction with the posters so that people know what they are, what the point of them is, how they're connected to designing Dedham 2030, and getting people to sort of the prompts. And as a quick reminder, these questions are linked to a Qualtrics kind of website interface where people would be able to either text and answer or provide information through their mobile phone and a web browser. And the QR code is leading them straight to that location. And so we're going to be, kind of launching the campaign all at once. And we are really hoping that you all will be helping us to, one, put up the posters and make sure that we are getting a really good dispersal of location types. And speaking of walkability, thinking about good spaces and places for us to hang up the posters where things are walkable and people do pass by, etc. So we are excited to get that off the ground and hoping everybody here will be helping us to implement that launch. So just a quick pause to see if there are any questions or comments.
If I may, Carolina, I just want to, this is for members, community members, because you guys were so great at getting over, what is it, 1,100 plus 700, almost 2,000 survey results, and we couldn't have done that without your outreach. We need to, again, go back to your role as community members to help us spread the word again. And I know you guys are tireless when it comes to this. So in the next couple of weeks, as we talk, we're going to get into some of the details, but we envision giving packages to you as committee members. We can either deliver them to you, or you can come by town hall and we can give you a packet. It'll probably be 8.5 by 11 posters of these, or basically flyers, and probably some lawn style signs that we hope that you could work with your stakeholders that you may know, and feel free to go at your comfort. I know this is COVID. I'm not asking you to go into any business and knock on them. But if you feel comfortable, if you know some businesses that might be able to help us out, we can put them in the windows. We're going to, again, lean on you to help us get these out. Or if you know some prominent locations that aren't public properties, we'll look for you in your areas to put these up. And so you'll hear from us in the next couple of weeks about delivering these either to your doorstep or coming to pick them up. We'll give you all the materials that you need. You just simply utilize your great networks that have been helpful thus far, and we'll go from there. And so Jess, you want to say something?
Oh, I just wanted to add that a part of, just a reminder, was that a part of this idea, the genesis for this idea, was from our initial survey data, the 1,100, with 1,100 responses. One of many interesting pieces of data that came out of that was that something like 47% of people who responded said that their main source of information about Dedham was actually from their neighbors. So not from town emails, not the town website, not the newspaper, not Facebook, but actually their neighbors. And so this is a way to get out into the neighborhoods and get people engaged. So that's why we're, one of the reasons we're doing it, but also one of the reasons that each of your involvement in terms of getting these into the right places in your neighborhoods is going to be so critical.
And I definitely want to thank Carolina. When you see these all splayed out, they're colorful, they're engaging, they're simple, and thank you for getting into this. There's been a lot of conversations on getting these, and we're finally at the stage to roll these out and utilize these for the next couple months until it snows, and as we start to go towards the fall virtual open houses. So thank you, everyone. Anything else, Carolina?
No, I just want to say that this is really a launching pad for the deep dive conversations that we're going to be having in the fall. And having this sort of presence, that's a physical presence in the town, I think will be impactful to having us have a different presence that's not just virtual. And just noting the importance of that in this thinking about how people access their information and being well-rounded in that. So again, this is definitely a group effort from all of you and the outreach working group members, as well as other folks have given a lot of feedback on these. So yeah, excited to see it out there, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you.
So I'll just be very brief, but so next steps we've outlined somewhat, but we're seeing here where we are. So we're well into the process now. We will continue for the remainder of this year embarking on these topic area discussions and presentations month by month. And we will be continuing working to draft the vision statement to get that to a place where everyone's really happy with it. Implementing the poster campaign as was just discussed. Continuing with the topic areas, and then getting eventually some of those one-sheet summaries that define the goals out to you all to refine with us. And then Carolina and I are working now kind of behind the scenes to set ourselves up for fall stakeholder outreach and what that means, and getting a campaign and strategy for that so that we can build out these conversations as we start to get content and materials in a more public way, both for the vision statement and for the topic area goals, and how do we structure those conversations and get those out to a broader audience. So we're brainstorming how to have that happen, and in the next meeting or so, we'll bring some additional information back to the committee about that strategy.
Thank you, Josh. And if I may, so next meeting, I don't know if that's on a slide, Josh, but next meeting, we're meeting through the rest of the year, third Tuesday. Next topic, which again, I'm sure will elicit great conversation and feedback and comments. We'll be talking housing. But I also want to say, not saving the best for last, hoping we can review the meeting minutes that we've distributed, and hopefully everyone has read them. And if so, hopefully there's no comments, and everyone can, we can do, I hate to do a roll call with 14 people, but if we can get an approval of the meeting minutes. And so Josh, maybe you can switch us back to the regular view.
Yes.
I think if we all fit on the same page.
I'll take a thumbs up as opposed to a vote.
Did anyone have
verbal
any
vote.
changes to the minutes?
I don't have any changes. I was just wondering, are the comments in the chat included as part of the meeting minutes, or is it only things said out loud?
Michelle, I think we've included them, right? No?
I believe there were maybe 2 side comments from the last meeting itself, so they weren't directly quoted in there, but the information itself was said aloud by committee members.
Is that going forward, Michelle? Is it too big an ask to just confirm that, can you just go through to make sure? It sounds like you did last time, but just, is it okay to say each time you'll kind of check the chat to make sure that if they weren't spoken in the minutes, you could just paste them in?
Yeah, so what I can do is maybe include a section on the bottom that just has that additional chat information, but that way that we'll have those direct quotes inserted in there.
Great, that'd be great.
This is a new world, including chat minutes.
Well, it's also a nice way, particularly since sometimes we get members of the public who make comments that way.
Yes.
I think that's a nice thing to do. So is there, I don't hear suggestions for editing or changes to the minutes from our July meeting. Is there a motion to accept them?
I'll make a motion.
A motion from, oh, I saw it. I heard a motion from Andrew, and I saw a second from Shaw. Great. All in favor, could you thumbs up or? Great.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, we're going to consider that a pass.
Sorry,
Unanimous
I can't hear.
vote.
Literally every time I turn on my camera, my computer crashes.
Okay.
I haven't
thank
figured
you.
this out. It's weird.
Right. Great. All right.
Thank you, everyone. And again, we're pretty timely, and that was a lot to go for. So thank you, everyone. And we'll meet in a month. We'll talk housing. There'll be some stuff about our poster campaign in between, and I'm sure there'll be lots. And if you have outflying comments, please feel free to let us know.
And I'll follow up with everybody tomorrow and just see who'd like to volunteer to be on the working group to discuss the vision statement.
Thank you. Great meeting.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Enjoy the
everyone.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
particularly
Good night.
thanks to Travis and Mara. It was a really fantastic presentation. Great to get into that data.
Thank you, Travis. Good to see you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
See you, Sharna, and everyone. Really
Bye.
appreciate the input. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Night.